Can a river keep a secret longer than a church can keep a hymn? Its mouth full of reeds, its breath smelling of iron and rain? Can Good Friday bells carry across water softly enough that a man might mistake their sorrow for mercy, and step nearer to the edge that has waited for him since winter first learned his name? And can silence held for years like a nail kept under the tongue become a weight, a stone, a current, a hand that does not shake when it finally presses down? Pause and listen to the water. There is something it wants you to know, and something it will never say. If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. Louisiana, 1819. The river wrote its slow scripture along the cane fields, curling its brown letters around driftwood and heron legs, around cypress knees and the old roots of rumour. The big house stood a careful distance from the bank, painted with the kind of white that pretends not to hear. Boards swelled and sighed in the heat, shutters trembled, though there was no wind. The overseer's whistle cut the mornings thin and narrow, evenings widened again, and frogs took the measure of the dark with their throats. In the quarters the world was counted differently by the burnt taste of last year's molasses caught in the ladled seam, by the way a floorboard remembered a bare foot at midnight, by the number of times a mother rewound a lullaby around a child's fear until both fell quiet. There was a grammar to the work, the way the cane gave if you spoke to it low, the way the river answered a thrown pebble with a circle of its own. Caleb learned both grammars young, along with another, older one, how silence could be trained to behave like patience. The master had a voice that tried to occupy the entire yard when it stepped outside with him. He wore his shirt loose when the heat rose, and kept his boots on when he dozed on the veranda, an animal never fully asleep. He liked to stand near the sugar house at dusk, where the sky reddened in a way he understood. Scorched, useful, profitable. He kept a ledger. Cane cut, syrup boiled, bodies rented, babies born, mouths fed. The book's spine had a crack in it from where it had been opened too often with the same hunger. Sundays were a kind of truce drawn on paper and broken in the mouth. Psalms were sung. The master's wife lowered her eyes with the weight of a prayer that did not include anyone who knelt outside the fence. Good Friday came earlier that year in the heart than on the calendar. You could hear it in the way the house creaked before dawn. You could see it in the candle that ruined itself trying to learn the room it lit. You could taste it in the iron-tanged breath of the river, which waited the way a judge waits, shoulders back, hands quiet. Caleb walked the same path every day to the far field, and the path walked him back. He was tall in the way of trees that learned not to speak about storms. His hands had a private memory. They remembered a sister's braid, now gone. They remembered a mother's wrist, turned once to shield, once to soothe. They remembered the first time they lifted a bucket and understood weight as a name the world called you by. He wore a scar at the heel of his right thumb. The master's ring had done it, that day with the cane knife and the lesson about haste. The scar spread its pale leaf under his skin and taught him what not to forget. The river talked to the yard without moving its mouth. It sent up mosquitoes and certainty. Turtles crowded its slow grammar with their stubborn punctuation. Cypress branches drank their shadows and gave none back. Every evening Caleb's steps paused at the edge of the bank for a heartbeat, no more, and then continued. He did not bow to the water, and he did not breathe it in greedily. He counted it. The water noticed. I have been making a book with no paper. Some men hold a feathered pen, dip it into nights, and write their arithmetic down, with nicknames to make the math polite. I hold the pen beneath my ribs, where it cannot be confiscated. My ink is days. My numbers are breath. The first page, a small memory. The cane stalk that broke under my hand late in the afternoon when my back said no, and the sun said nothing. The master's voice arrived where I was and treated the error like a crime. The ring on his hand sparkled with the river in it, and the river sparkled with the ring. He took my right hand in his left and corrected me with iron. The scar knew me up. Another page. My sister Dinah, 12, then 13, then gone to the kitchen house and its knives, to the master's wife and her appetite for new silence. Dinah's laughter turned into a thin thread pulled through cloth. You could still hear it, but only if you listened to the seam. I put 3 marks in the ledger, and when I ran out of ink I added a pause, which hurt more than the marks. Another, my mother's back like a dark gospel, preached from dawn to dusk, then bent over the wash-tub at night, her thumbs rubbed raw to teach cleanliness to a world that could not learn it. The overseer liked to interrupt her hymns with his own. The hymns sounded like rope, worms. I learned that a quiet man can keep company with a long anger and still be polite at the door. People think patience is surrender, but I saw the river keep company with a whole forest and never forget the sea. The river taught me to carry, it taught me to put weight in the right place, and to wait. There is a difference between waiting and being delayed. When Good Friday came toward us down the road like a dark wagon with candles in it, I took out the ledger and set it on the table of my ribs. I turned the pages with my breath. I wrote a question on a page. How long must a bruise memorize the hand that taught it? The river answered by leaning closer to the bank so softly no one noticed but me. I began to collect small things that felt like sentences. A length of discarded rope from the sugar house, stiff with last year's sweet, a rusted chain link the size of a prayer, a smooth river stone pale as a kneecap, the iron buckle from a mule's strap bent into a crescent any moon would recognize. I arranged them in my head the way a psalm arranges sorrow, repetition making meaning. At night I walked the yard in my sleep, and the ground kept my footprints like a secret. I thought about the master's boots, their hard wisdom. I thought about his habit of drinking near the river after supper, the way he liked to teach the water to hear his jokes. He would go down with a bottle and his white shirt unbuttoned to the first knot of chest hair, and talk to what would not answer. I watched this for months without staring. Observation is a kind of tithe you pay to the future. I let the plan ripen like cane, slow, green, patient. You do not hurry sugar, you do not hurry judgment. The rope softened in my hands. I wore it under my shirt in small lengths until it called me by my name. I tested the chain link in the dark like a tooth, felt the notch where a hook would hold. The stone taught my palm its round grammar. I wanted no knife, no sudden shine. Water has its own blade. I would learn to hold the handle. I timed the house by its noises. The master laughed biggest on Thursdays after the second cask arrived from town. He liked Good Friday because it made him feel generous. By afternoon he would be preaching mercy with his hat tipped back, and by evening he would be showing mercy the way a cat shows kindness to a wing. The yard would grow a new silence, a soft one with no overseer in it for a few hours. I practiced with weights and knots behind the smokehouse, asking the dark to be my teacher. Twice the knots slipped and told on me with a whisper. I learned another knot, the kind fishermen make with their eyes closed and their mouths open, telling stories. My hands remembered the lesson and my tongue agreed. I kept my face still and my tongue obedient. I carried water with both. I chose a place along the bank where the ground went soft quickly and the reeds leaned in like a congregation. Cypress knees made a choir of blunt fingers. The current there had an old patience. It did not hurry past like a gossiping woman. It accepted. Farther out, the river dropped away into a darker, colder grammar. Fish lived there that no one could name except the river itself. I did not need their names, I needed their distance. I watched the master's boots to learn the hour of his swagger. It was a little after dusk, when the sky went the colour of old blood inside linen and the mosquitoes grew brave. He would take the bottle and the Y of his shirt down to the water and practice telling jokes to God's reflection. I would be there, already shadow, already stillness. A man who believes he owns the dark cannot be taught by lantern light. He must be taught by a silence that has done its homework. I wrapped the rope and chain like a blessing around my waist beneath my shirt. The buckle I left in my palm a small moon. I rehearsed what not to say. Words make holes in a plan you have spent a lifetime weaving. I preferred the river's vocabulary. Pressure, current, let go. I did not ask the water for permission. I invited it to remember. I made an offering to memory the night before. 3 kernels of corn under the stoop, a quiet humming of the song my mother sang when storms walked past the quarters wearing boots. I asked nothing back. Asking is a habit that wears the knees. I stood and I waited, and the river practiced breathing with me. Good Friday evening came shrouded in a soft thunder that never broke. The sky held its breath. In the big house, black dresses turned the air grave and clean. A prayer was said that could not find the doorway to the quarters. The master drank publicly from the private cask and spoke about charity in a voice that wanted to be a hymn and settled for a boast. He touched the ledger twice with 2 fingers, as if to bless. He laughed toward the river and told it to wait up for him. It did. I moved when the yard moved, as if I were part of its hinge. Night made a low ceiling, the lanterns watched each other and forgot the corners. The rope against my ribs felt like a heartbeat that had learned a new measure. I walked to the bank first, my absence sitting quietly in the yard like a folded coat. I stood among reeds and listened to the sermon of insects and the wet prayer the mud says when it meets boot leather. He came alone, bottle tucked into the crook of his elbow the way a man carries a child he has not yet learned to love. His shirt was open, his boots were loud. He spoke to the river, and the river returned him to himself in pieces. Hat, collar, throat, hand. He smiled at his reflection and did not like the way it refused to look away. He swore at it. He called it by my name once with a laugh attack. I stepped out of the reeds like a word that had been hidden in a sentence too long. He did not start, men do not startle at their own yard. "Boy," he said, the way a man whistles to a dog who might be useful. The bottle lifted. His ring flashed a small moon. I did not answer. I stepped nearer as if to listen better, because silence has manners. The rope slid into my hands without thinking. He reached to swat my shoulder with the lazy authority of a man greeting a fence. I turned as if ashamed, and in that turn the rope made its circle. Quiet, correct, a halo that had been waiting to fall. The loop met his arms and the bottle at once. Glass cracked a soft amen against his ribs. He laughed, then choked, then laughed again, because nothing had ever refused him twice. The chain link kissed the loop with iron teeth. Weight introduced itself. I stepped backward into the mud and let the river take the other end of the conversation. He pulled, as if calling a mule to reason. I yielded as if to a waltz. The bank sighed, the reeds leaned, the cypress knees witnessed without looking. When his boots slid, his mouth opened to name the dark, the rope corrected his grammar. We moved together, he toward the water, me toward the earth beyond it. His boot heels wrote 2 stubborn lines down the bank that the next rain would memorize. The first cold touch of river took his breath in both hands. He shouted then, a sound more surprised than afraid. The surprise did not last. Fear is a quick learner. I gave the current what it asked for, not anger, not haste. I lowered the line as the water lifted its part of him, and where we met was justice. The bottle went first, making a small bell of itself that no church could compete with. His hat followed. His voice unstitched. There was a moment when heart belonged when he looked at me as if I had known him before his name. Perhaps I had. We are all water's children when the ledger closes. The river took him. Not cruelly, not kindly, precisely. Bubbles briefed the dark. A heron turned its page. Somewhere up the yard, the Good Friday hymn dragged its slow chain of notes across a parlour rug and pretended not to hear. I held the rope until the rope stopped asking me to hold it. Then I gathered it back, wet as a new sentence. I stood very still and listened to the argument between weight and depth conclude. The bank merely forgot our names. Morning shortens a story. It finds a fact and holds it up to the sun as if nothing else had happened. The river, they said, voices folded flat. A misstep, said the overseer, grateful to be spared the paperwork of truth. Drink, said the master's wife, as if water had poured itself into him. The ledger lay open as it always had, its two-finger blessing still printed in dust. Neighbours came from up and down the parish with faces arranged to honour the widow, and eyes that wanted a better tale. They spoke of currents and accidents. They spoke of the softness of banks this time of year, of how even a sober man can read the river wrong. They did not say my name. They did not look toward the reeds where my shadow had practised for months. They avoided the word justice, the way a child avoids a room he had been told not to. Newspapers wrote their customary poem about tragedy, in which the hero was always the man who drowned, and never the river that remembered. They printed a small square of sorrow and an inventory of good deeds, his donations to the church, his firm hand with labour, his promise to build a new dock for the betterment. In the quarters no one discussed the current. People spoke about weather and washing and the price of thread in town, about a baby with a fever and a mule with a new opinion. Silence did its old work, careful and clean. At night, though, when frogs taught the dark its lesson, a different silence kept company with us. It sat closer, warmed the hands of the old, gave the children. You could feel it in the way a spoon rested against a bowl, without knocking. The overseer's whistle lost half an inch of sharp. The new master, a cousin with more accounts than voice, kept the veranda as if it might break under him. He did not go to the river at dusk. He sent a hired man with the bottle and asked him not to linger. The yard walked differently around him, lighter in one place, heavier in another, as if a weight had been moved from one room to another without telling the floorboards why. Years later, people spoke of the spring when the river grew a peculiar conscience. They said a man had gone down where the reeds leaned like a congregation and the cypress knees did not kneel. They said his hat came back for a day to look at the house and then floated off toward a bend where the water liked to remember. They said no one saw anything, which was true in the way that rain does not remember which roof it chose first. On Good Fridays afterward, the bells measured their sorrow carefully, and the yard kept the sound at its edge like a dog on a short leash. Children were told not to play near the bank, though the reason trembled in the mouth before it was swallowed. A heron stood watch most evenings, tall as a letter the river had not sent yet. When wind hurt the cane, it made a sound that could have been a laugh or a prayer, depending on who stood still to hear it. As for the ledger, it learned a new arithmetic. Some pages do not add, they subtract. Some debts do not collect, they return themselves to water. A cousin's hand turned the crack in the spine into a rule. He wrote softly, and when the book grew heavy, he shut. On certain nights, if you walk the bank with shoes in your hand, and the moon upright in its cup, you will hear a rope speak the grammar of weight to the current, and the current reply with the patient accent of justice. You will feel the ground under your feet remember 2 boot heels sliding toward a truth that did not need witnesses. The reeds will not move, the cypress will practice its old stillness. And if you listen long enough, you will discover what Caleb learnt and never said, that silence, properly kept, is not a hiding place. It is a river held in the chest until the hour it must be poured. It is a hand that learned the shape of judgment by counting and counting and counting until the number answered back. The story does not end. It turns at the bend like water and goes on out of sight. A hat still floats somewhere. A bottle rings once and then declines to prove it was ever glass. A ledger breathes, unfinished, and the river, with its mouth full of secrets and its breath smelling of iron and rain, keeps what it was given, and gives back only the echo, a soft bell from beneath, the sound of weight being understood, and the old question, can a river keep a secret longer than a church can keep a hymn? Turning over and over, as patient as justice, as sure as the pull of the dark toward the dark.